Hello, I'm David Zavislin, and I'd like to welcome you to today's training presentation on Civil 3D points. Let me first overview what we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about the basics of point data in Civil 3D, and I'm going to make a lot of comparisons to Land Desktop to help you get a better understanding of the behavior of points and using point objects in Civil 3D. Talk about the different settings in Civil 3D. There's various locations where we can establish the settings and how those will affect the behavior of points. And then also we're going to look at the different styles for displaying our points. I'll also look at some of the basic labeling functionality. Again, in Land Desktop, we're used to having our point object with the point number, elevation, and description components. Well, Civil 3D, the points don't have text on them. We have to do that with labels and label styles. We'll also look at description keys and how Civil 3D handles that. And then we'll finish up by taking a look at point groups. Hopefully, for those of you who've done points in Land Desktop, a lot of this, with the exception of the styles and labels component, this should be pretty familiar to you. And we'll see that I've tried to configure all of our defaults for Civil 3D to be very similar to what we've had in Land Desktop. All right, and we'll start off with point data. Unlike Land Development Desktop, Civil 3D does not have a COGO point database file. So we no longer have that points database file in the COGO folder like we're used to in Land Desktop. And what that means is when we do bring in point data into Civil 3D, that data gets stored directly in the drawing file. So that data in one drawing is not available to any of my other drawings in my project. And what I would have to do is, if I need to see the points in a second drawing, I would then have to import the points into that drawing as well. There are ways we could force Civil 3 to do that, but it requires us to set up some additional servers for using the Vault software, and right now we don't have any plans on doing that. So there are going to be a few issues in terms of dealing with workflow in how we address and manage the point data, and unfortunately I haven't used them enough on a full project to have a good explanation for that, so that is something we are going to work through as we begin initially here. All right. Points can be added from our drawings to what's called a survey database, and for today's presentation I don't have enough time to address that. In a couple weeks I am doing a presentation on bringing in field data through Trimble Link and Fieldbook files into Civil 3D. In that presentation, we will introduce you to the survey database functions within Civil 3D, and that is a database file that I can connect to multiple drawings, similar to what we're used to in Land Desktop, and I can use that as a way to manage and exchange point data. But for today, we're not going to go into that level. We're going to look mainly at the drawing file and bringing the point data into the drawing. So I just want to make you aware of those items. All right. We're going to start off in the first portion here. I'm going to go look at a drawing. We're going to look at some of the settings at the drawing level for controlling our points. And really, there's not a whole lot there, but we will take a look at that. Then we'll look at the point settings, kind of get you an introduction into the settings options on the tool space tab. And then we'll also look at some specific command settings for creating points. All right, now I'm going to switch over. I've got that's not it. Try that. There we go. I'm running the Cadillac application for the Catapult Cadillac version here. And I'm going to create a new drawing. And the project I'm working in is just one of my training projects. And I've got a little working folder here that we're going to play with. And I'm going to start with the Create File tab. And I want to point out, for Civil 3D, I've created a whole series of template files for multi-standard settings and styles. And the one I'm going to start with today is this one here. It's called the FTO_I, so it's an Imperial version, FTO Field to Office. And that one's critical for what we're going to do today, because that one has all of the Nolte standard point styles, label styles, and the Nolte description keys. Unlike Land Desktop, there is not an external description key file. They're actually saved in this template. So we do need to make sure for bringing in point data with Nolte field codes that we start off with this FTO DWT file. All right. So I'm going to pick that, and I'm just going to do temp, we'll just call it webinar for now, and I will create that file. And I am working in the Civil 3D 2009 application today. Don't recommend you using the Civil 3D 2007. 2009 is much more stable. And we're almost there. It takes a bit to load Land Desktop, it takes a bit to load Civil 3D. All right, so I got it open here. Let me rearrange it a little bit. So I've got my profile set up and my workspace set up, so I do get the tool space here on, let me just move this around here, on the left side of my screen. On the Prospector tab is where I get to all of my data. What we'll be looking at today are going to be the points and the point group branches here. But for right now, I'm going to start over on the Settings tab, and we're going to look at first up at the drawing level at the settings that we're going to interact with, and then we'll come down into this points branch here and then look at all the different settings and then eventually all the styles that are located here as well. At the drawing level, I'm going to right-click, I'm going to edit drawing settings, and we're just going to kind of quickly go through a lot of these. Units of zone is where I establish my drawing scale or my drawing units. So I'm going to be working in feet. If we are working in metric or we're importing metric point data, you do have an option here to specify which conversion factor you use to convert your data from meters to feet or feet to meters. So we can either go the international foot or the U.S. survey foot definition, so depending on what you want to work with. Today I'm not doing any coordinate conversion, so I'm not going to really worry about that at this point or for this drawing. The Scale tab is where we can set our initial model space annotation scale. So if I pick 20 or 30 here, that's going to be equivalent as setting it down here on the command line. All right. I'm going to leave this one at 20. The coordinate zone projections, again, if we were bringing in grid data, we could then use this to translate or convert our data between one coordinate projection and another. So I can go from UTM to state plane, vice versa, or I can go from different state plane coordinate projections, but I do have to assign that to my drawing. The data I'm working with today is using an assume project coordinate system. We're going to work at 5,000, 5,000, or 10,000, 10,000. I'm going to make sure I'm set to no datum, no projection, so I don't generate any lat long or grid coordinates for my data. All right, transformation tab. If I had assigned a coordinate projection, I could then come in here and apply transformation settings so I can then scale my coordinates between, say, my drawing ground coordinates and then be able to get map projection or grid coordinates from that. But I would have to have, on the units and zone, I'd have to tell it what coordinate projection for my grid, and then I'd have to put in my scale factors, or I could pick points in my drawing and use a point and put in what the grid coordinate would be for that point to do a translation, and then we can also do a scale factor to scale our data up or down to our map projection based on where we're located. I'm going to skip that for now. Object layers, not a whole lot here for points, because what we're going to see as we work through today is the point objects are going to be created on layers based on our description key file, very similar to what we do in Land Desktop, so there aren't any point layers listed here. I'm going to skip abbreviations and then jump over to ambient settings, and just a couple of things we're going to look at here. We do have tooltips turned on, and we'll see that we do get tooltips for points. And then there's also an option here I've got turned off right now, but this one actually works pretty well by changing this to yes. Save command or save changes to command settings. What that does is as I go through and create points and I modify the settings of the create points command, those will actually get saved to my defaults in my drawing. So it kind of lets you set the defaults while you're working, and then it kind of evolves your drawing. All right, so we'll leave that as it is. We'll pick OK. So I've got my drawing set up, and now we're going to work in, and I need to look at some of my point settings. So I'm going to come down to the point branch here in the Settings tab, right-click, and I can edit Feature Settings. And what we'll see here is all of these property groups with the drawing icon indicate that these are drawing settings. I could have set those back here on my drawing setting command. What is unique to points are going to be the 3 items here with the point icon. So I'm going to expand this. I'm going to say our default point styles, and we're using one that we've named _point-X. This is a generic X symbol. We've got one that does a plus symbol, and then you'll see later on that we've got the hundreds of symbols for doing all the different symbology that we like to put on points. And then the default style we're going to apply are the PZD, our point number elevation description. So it'll look very similar to what we have in Land Desktop. Our point naming, I'm not using these right now. Point group names, it has a format that it'll put in there, point group -1, -2, -3. That's kind of meaningless to me. I'm going to name my groups based on what they contain, so I'm not going to really worry about that too much. And then point names, I'm not using point names. That's if you are using an alphanumeric point number, that would be considered a point name, and I'm not using those today. And then the final item here is not relevant to what we're doing because this refers back to the Vault database, and that allows you to check in points or edit points that are checked in or out from the point database. We aren't using Vault, so this will have no effect on our project, but I just thought I'd tell you what that is. All right, so you can see those default values. So that's kind of the global point settings, and then there's one more I want to look at here, and this gets down to the command level. So under points, I'm going to come down here, there's a commands folder, and what we're interested in today is what happens when we create points. And this will apply to any of the point creation commands. So let me right-click on this, and I'm going to edit the command settings. Like we saw in the previous dialog, all of the drawing icons indicate that these settings are actually being copied or inherited down from the parent of the drawing level. We've got a few here that are inherited from the point level. And then we've got these icons here with the little check boxes, which mean these are unique to this command. All right, and there is one minor exception that Autodesk made on this one here. So the point identity in previous versions was managed up at the point level. Well, in 2009, this is now managed through the command settings for the create point command. So we're going to take a look at those 3 items here. All right, default layer. Don't really use this one, and we'll see why a little bit later on because of description keys, but the default layer is for any point that for some reason or another we don't have description keys enabled or we're not using them. This is the layer all of our points will end up on. So we've used kind of the generic --C3 name indicating it's a Civil 3D object, and then the Nolte standard PT for point. Point creation, this is what you want to have as you're creating points. So we'll see some of our local coordinates. We're going to work by northing and easting, grid or the grid northing and grid easting, so on. Do we want to be prompted for elevation? So if I'm doing just boundary work, I don't have any elevation data, I can come into this command here, or this option here, and set it to none. Or maybe I'm setting a few hundred points at the exact same elevation. I can come in here, change this to automatic, and then down here I can specify what that default elevation value is. All right, I know starting out I'm going to be manual. I want it to prompt me for elevations. Point names, again, are the alphanumeric point numbering. We're not using that in this example or in this project, so I'm going to leave that set to none. And then descriptions like elevations, I can have it either be automatic, manual, or none. And then they also have this option here for objects. So if I set point on the object, it'll actually indicate if the object had a name or object name, it'll include that as the point descriptor. And then I can also specify a default description. For description keys, we've got this parameter here for this option for matching the description key parameters. So if we want to scale and rotate symbols based on information in the field code, we need to make sure this is set to true. And then we've got this negative setting here. Is do you want to disable description keys is set to false, which basically means I want to have description keys turned on. So description keys disabled is false. And then the last one here, echo coordinates to command line, I've got that set to true. And then what that'll do is as I create points through the various commands, I will get an echo down here on the command line of the point number, description, northing and easting, and elevation. All right, so that's all of our point creations. Last one here, point identity controls our point numbering. So as I'm setting points, do I want to use sequential numbering, which I do. I've got it set to true. It will then start with point number 1 and then increment on to 2, 3, and 4. Well, this is where if I've erased a bunch of points, I can come back in and reset this point number counter back to my lowest available point number. All right, same thing if I import points, if they're supplied, use those. We're not using names, so I'm going to leave that set to false. And then what to do if point numbers already exist, and you have some options to renumber, merge, overwrite. And these are very similar to the point settings that we had in the LAN desktop. So renumber, we'll add in our point sequence here of 1000. Merge will actually take any data with the point data coming in and merge it with the data for that same point number already in the database. So I could import, say, point number and elevation, and that would merge it then with the northing and easting already in my drawing file for those points. Overwrite is exactly what it says. It'll get rid of the point that's in my drawing and replace it with the new version, and then notify, which is the default, will prompt you for those options at the command line. All right, so that's our point identity settings. What we'll see is as we use the Create Points toolbar, this field here, or this group, the point identity, the default layer, and the point creations are actually available in the Create Points command as well, so I don't have to come back into this area here. All right, so let me pick OK to that. So we saw all of our settings. What I'd like to do now is just create a few points. So let's come up to the point pull-down menu. And the first half of the menu is all the different create point commands. All of these create point options that we see in this area here are all available through this first command called create points, which will bring up our create point toolbar. Okay, so that's a way I'm going to do it today. Earlier versions of Civil 3D didn't have these menu groups. They just had the toolbar, so I've kind of gotten the habit of using that. We've also got our menus here for importing and exporting points, very similar to LAN desktop. We can list points, brings up a point list dialog. We've got our edit point command, which I'll do a little bit later on, that we can then bring up a tabular editor for our points. Plus, we can also modify the datum or elevations for a whole bunch of points. We can add tables, so if we want to have a point table, we can do that. And then there's some utilities down here just to point out a couple of things that I've used quite a bit as we migrate from LAN desktop, and I guess not Sofdesk, from LAN desktop. We can open a drawing with LAN desktop points and convert those to Civil 3D point objects. Okay, or we can convert AutoCAD points. All right, so I'm going to do create point command. And we'll see this dialog. If it comes in by default, it should be minimized, but I can click on the little down arrow button here, expand it, and you'll see here are those settings again. So I can come in, make sure I'm using the right point number. I can come in and look at my point creation and quickly determine whether or not I'm working with elevations or descriptions. So I've got both of those set to manual, so that is how I want to work. And then the toolbar, we've got the different button menus here, and we can pop down. So here's all of our kind of generic point creation. I can do it by station offset relative to an object. I can do it by direction and distance. We've got the other commands here, so I can do it by bearing distance, other point creation commands that we're used to seeing in LAN desktop. We can do it relative to an alignment. We can do just some random points on a grid along objects. And moving our way across, we've got the point interpolation commands. Last menu here are some point grading commands where I can calculate high point, low point, or elevations by slope and grade. And then the final button on here brings up our import command, which I'll do a little bit later. So I'm going to come over here and I just want to make sure I'm using the manual command here. And then we'll see in the command line it's almost identical to the LAN desktop. So I'm going to say I want to go to 5,000, 5,000. And point description, I'll put in SV for spot elevation, and then throw in some numbers for an elevation. All right, so you can see echo to the command line. It shows me my northern easting, elevation, asking me to specify another point. I'm just going to hit return and then zoom extent so we can get to that point. And it'll bring it up so we can see now I've got a point at 5,000, 5,000. And I've tried to set this up so by default it looks just like my land desktop point objects, what we're used to. And I'll come in, I'll create a couple more here, so miscellaneous. And I'm just going to pan around and throw in a few. So we'll give it another description here of SV, make sure cap locks are on, throw in an elevation, put another one down here just so we can have a few more, throw some elevation, and maybe I'll do a different description here. Let's do like a WTFH for a fire hydrant and elevation, and we'll see that one now I'm getting a different symbol on it. So just like with land desktop and our description keys, I'll throw in. So I'll throw in. I got 5 points. Now that's enough. So we can kind of just see I get these point objects, and we'll look a little bit at description keys and what's going on with these points. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the markers and the symbols here. So let me jump back over to my PowerPoint. And I missed. Try that one. There we go. All right. So in the PowerPoint, let's come back. All right. Point styles. All right. The point style will either place a marker like the X that we saw, or it's going to place a symbol block like a fire hydrant or a tree symbol. We also use styles to control the labels, and the default label style is going to be point number, elevation, and description to look just like we did in land desktop. And again, I just want to reiterate, like I said earlier, all of these styles and everything that you need are going to be in that FTO_I template file that we've shipped with our Civil 3D or installed with our Civil 3D deployment. All right, so we're going to use these to control the appearance of our objects. And one of the things that we're going to kind of struggle with today is how do we control which style gets applied to the points. And I've made a little flow chart here to hopefully explain this for us. It gets a little confusing. Land desktop, you had your point display properties, and then you put markers on it with description keys, or not markers, but you put symbols on it, and that was that. All right, in Civil 3D, it's a little more complicated. So when we create a point, so we start in our process here, as we come down, it's going to see, does it match a description key? All right, if it matches a description key, then it does or checks to see if that description key assigns a style. And we'll see as we look at description keys later on that there is an option to use defaults. Okay, and then if there is not a group override, our point is going to get the styles from the description key, and that includes both the point style and the label style that's applied to that point. All right, you answer no to any of these, maybe there's no description key or our description key does not assign an explicit style. We come over to this branch here, and then it's going to look to the point group, or not point group. Yeah, excuse me, I said that right, to the point group to assign the style. And in that case, it's then going to get either the default style for that group for the point object and also the label style. And as we work through today's presentation, as we look at description keys and point groups, hopefully you'll see where this comes through. And then the final one, if the group doesn't assign a style, which is very rare, then it's going to use those two style defaults that we saw in our drawing settings command, or in our drawing settings, our point settings that we just looked at. Most of the time, or the way our description keys are set up, this is going to happen, or it's going to come to this branch here, and it's going to come over and look at the groups. And then we're going to have, there's a group called all points that every point belongs to. That one's going to have a default style. So more than likely, this will always be yes, and it's going to get it from here. So those are really the main two places that points are going to get the styles from. And the reason I spend this much time on it in this mode here is this is some of the stuff that people really struggle with when you go to Civil 3D from land desktop is how do I make these things look the way I want them to look? Why are they why do they have this marker on it? So I really want this to be clear. All right, so let me jump back over to my Civil 3D. All right, so we've got some points here. I'm going to zoom in and select one of these. And first off, we're going to talk a little bit about grips and grip editing. All right, the point label is included as part of the point, but they're controlled by separate styles. And we've got, as we zoom in here, we get several different grips here. If I pick this grip here, I can physically move the point. So let's set this up to show that to you. So I'm going to come into my prospector now, and we'll open this up. So here's all my points as I select on the point category here, the point feature group. So we're going to look at point number 1. So we can see it's at 5,000, 5,000. I'll actually grab this grip, and let me turn ortho on to make sure I got ortho on. There we go. So I'm going to just move it in the easting direction. So I'm going to pick it and pop it over. And one of the things I want you to notice is it modified that elevation, modified the easting on the fly. So you really have to watch now, because these objects in the drawing, these are my point data. So if I accidentally move them, grip edit, and place them in a different location, they will change their coordinates, and that is now what the coordinate of that point is. It's not like I have the Kogo point database where I can do the checkpoints, update drawings like you do in Land Desktop. I mess them up here, I need to go back to my original data and re-import them. All right, I also want to show I can edit points through here. I can say we'll set that back to 5,000, hit enter, and we'll see our point then jumps back to that location. All right, so that's grip editing. Same thing with the move command. Other grips on here, the little green circle lets me rotate the point. Let me turn ortho off here, and I can change the rotation angle for my point. The label style is configured to match the point rotation. So as I rotate the point object, you're going to see that your label style, in this case, will rotate with it. All right. If I don't like the rotation or how I've grip edited my point objects, I can select it, right mouse click, and oops, I didn't get it. Let me try this again. Let me pick it again, right click, and it's not going to let me, because I didn't change the label, so I can't reset it. So I'm going to have to change my rotation. I'll show you another way to fix it. I can do it through the properties as well. So I'll get it back close. All right, select again the other groups I have. This box here lets me drag the label, and we've got the label style set up that as you drag it, you will get a leader, and then you get this M-text type of text object that'll display the information. All right, and this is real nice, because if I drag it over to this side, we'll see by doing it this way, it'll then flip and maintain the relative location to the leader line. Okay, this is the one where if I right-click, I can come in, I say reset the label back to that point. We can also move our labels and then right-click on them, and we can pin the label. All right, come on, let me pin this guy. There it is, toggle label pin. All right, now when I pick it, you'll see I get this big red thumbtack on there, but now if I grip edit and move the point, you'll see I can move the point around, the data will change, but the label stays where you placed it. All right, well, I'm not going to move my point, and I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to turn the label pin off. All right, again, if I come in here, and I can then reset the label. I'll grip edit one last time. The fourth grip here is this blue circle. If I pick on that, it actually toggles little grips for each of my label components. So this label style was built that the elevation is one component, the point number is a component, and the description is a component. So I can actually click on these and drag them around and move them independent of each other. You have to watch, because of the way the style was developed, if I move my elevation, you're going to see that the other two move with it, because in the label style I defined it so that this element, or the elevation, is relative to the point, and then the number and description are relative to the elevation. So the way I've put this style together, they are going to move together when I move that one. Again, if I want to put it back together, I right-click and hit reset, and it places them back at the proper location. So that's kind of some of the grip editing that we have, or what we can do to this. Looking at our point styles now. So let me come into my dialog here, or in my tool space. So we'll kind of minimize this. And I'm back in the point branch. I'm going to expand point styles. All right. This is where Civil 3D gets a little overwhelming, and as we scroll through here, you're going to see that I've got quite a few styles defined. All right. Pretty much like anything in Civil 3D, you're always going to have a standard, kind of like you have a standard font and a standard dim style in AutoCAD. All right, every one of these styles is set up because they place the symbol for the object. So let's take a look at the ones we're using right now. So I'm using this point X, so I'm going to right-click on it and go into Edit. And we're going to come in here, Generic Information tab here, the Marker tab. So this one we're telling it to use the custom marker. We're using the cross for a point, and this is very similar to what you would set up in your land desktop point object. And then over here we tell it how to scale it, and most of our symbols and point styles we've set up to use the drawing scale, and it's going to have a plotted height of 1 inch. Civil 3D will then change that as we change our drawing scale down here or as we change our viewport scales. So these objects will always plot at 1/10 of an inch. Okay. 3D-wise, 3D geometry, we've told it that in the 3D view we just want to see them flattened to 0. Okay, but you can say, actually use the point elevation. So if I want to see my points up at elevation, I can actually do that. By also using the elevation, you can use AutoCAD node O-snaps and snap to the points to get elevation values for drawing feature lines or 3D polylines. For now, the default is set to that. And the third option there I skipped, you can also exaggerate these by a scale factor, which would only be used if we're doing any kind of exaggerated 3D viewing. Display tab controls the layers and what components are visible. So you can see for this style, we can turn on and off whether or not you see the marker itself or the label. And we've tried to set all the default styles up so they're on layer 0 and then color is by layer. And then these will actually behave the way AutoCAD blocks do. When you create a block with the objects on layer 0, they will inherit the properties of the layer they're inserted on. So you'll see, even though layer 0 is kind of this dark gray color, we'll look in our drawing here that our marker is taken on the color 21 or whatever that we're using for our spot elevation points. All right. And then summary just lets you see all of this data in a single location. All right, so we'll pick OK to that. The other marker we're using is the fire hydrant here. So let's come down to the water fire hydrant, and I'm going to edit that one. Okay, and we'll see on this one now for the marker, the option we're using is to use an AutoCAD block. And unlike Land Desktop, it's not looking out at a symbol library on the Q drive or on your C drive. I've got to have all of these symbols in my drawing or all these blocks in my drawing in order to use it. So I'm going to scroll across, and we'll see this one's using the EXWTFH block, which shows up over here in our little preview. All right, the sizing is a little different than what we're used to working with blocks. The size assumes that the maximum extent of the symbol is 1. So it's going to size this object that from this point here to this point across here, so my height is the maximum, irregardless of what size that block is. It assumes that as a dimension of 1, actually scales it by 1. So then I set the height now that I want this object to be 2/10 of an inch high when plotted. So at 20 scale, it's going to be 4 units high. Right, 20 times 0.2 is going to give me 4. So that's one of the things you kind of have to watch with the markers is it doesn't matter what you drew the original block at. If I say 0.2 inches, this max distance here is going to be 0.2 inches when I draw it. All right. Other items we can set here is we can set a rotation angle, which will rotate the entire block, which will also rotate our text. So if I say come in here and I change that to say 90, and we'll play with this a little bit. And then I can also do the orientation reference, whether we're doing it world, view, or object. Most of these we do world coordinates. That way when I deview twist, my symbols are not going to rotate. Whereas if I did it to the view, my symbols would always maintain this rotation angle relative to the view. So most of the stuff we want to do with our symbology, we want it to be world coordinates. So let me go ahead and pick OK to that. And then we'll see just by changing that style, let me zoom extents here, by changing that style, we see that these points are now coming in rotated. Okay. My label style says rotate with the object, so I'd have to go back and edit my style. We'll take a look at that a little bit later on. All right, so let me come back in here, edit this one, and I'm going to change the rotation back to 0. Pick OK. My drawing updates. As soon as it regens, there they go. And all of the symbols for the fire hydrants are now facing east as their default rotation angle. All right, to show the scale component here, if I measure quick distance across here, if I go from, oops, I snap to the object. Let me turn my snaps off. And we'll see that's approximately, I eyeballed it. So I got 4 units, so it is taking that 0.2 times my drawing scale, whereas if I change my scale here and say I want my drawing to be 40 scale, you see everything resizes on the fly. So that's that dynamic behavior of labels and objects in Civil 3D that I don't have to worry about the drafting aspect of it so much as long as I put in the right object in the right style. Based on my drawing scale or my viewport scale, they were going to resize automatically. Okay, I was just working at 20 scale because it makes it a little bit easier for me to see what's going on in my drawing here. All right. Okay. All right. Excuse me as I go through my notes here. All right. A couple other things going on. I can edit the styles on the fly as well. So I'm going to select, say, this point here. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to go into my edit point command. And I could have selected multiple points to edit. I can also get to this command off the point pull down under edit points, and then we have all these different options, or this command here, and you got different methods of selecting them. I can also do it by point group. All right. In the dialog, we'll see all of our point data, our descriptions, our raw description, our full description, and then as I come across, we'll see here are the styles that were assigned to this point, and this was assigned by our description keys, which I'll look at in a little bit, but I can actually click on the point style field here, and it brings up a dialog showing them all to me, and the reason we did our generic ones with the underscore first is that way they sort to the top of the list and makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to change that one to the point X, or point plus, excuse me, close down my editor, and we'll see that one now has a plus symbol. And I can do that to the entire group of points or select them all and change the symbol that way. Another way you can modify these is by selecting the points you want to modify. So I'll say I'll grab those two, I'll right-click, and then I'll just go into my AutoCAD Properties window. And this is something they've added in the newer versions, but we'll see I can come in here and I can change my point style here. So let me double click, or there we go, click on that, and I'll say I'll change those to the point X. I can change the rotation, and then same thing for the label style. I can come in here and pick a different label style. So maybe these, I just want to see the elevation, so I've got a Z label style, and we'll hit OK, and I can modify those. So you can either do it through the edit point command, or we can do it through the properties dialog, which is a nice way to do it. And then the third way that we kind of saw a little bit earlier, by selecting the points here, I can come actually into Prospector and scroll across, and we'll see here, here's those. Maybe I can change that one back to the PZD, and I can change it back that way as well. So a lot of different ways to change the styles. All right. Well, let me see if you guys are still awake. I'm going to ask a few questions here, so we're going to test your knowledge. So on your screen now, there should be a question there. If you guys could answer that. So I want to know, where does Civil 3D store the Kogo point data? So I'll let quite a few of you vote. So we'll see who's paying attention. All right, kind of wake you up. It's my way of waking you guys up. Okay. And I guess that's enough. We'll close the poll. And thankfully, everybody paid attention, and the answer is Civil 3D stores the point data in the drawing they were created or imported to. So very, very good. All right. Next one. Next question to see how we're doing here. All right. Where do you set the next point number? All right. Where did we see that option? So was it in the drawing settings, the point number settings, or the create point command settings? So I'll let you guys vote on that one. Anybody voting? There's a couple votes. Oh, people, you're killing me here. All right. I assume everybody's voted. Oh, couple more shy. See, one or two more. All right. Most of you are getting this. A couple people are changing their answers. Let me close the poll, and we'll show that. All right, that one is, we should be playing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and this is our audience poll. The correct answer is the create point command settings. All right, so let me hide those results. Again, in our settings tab, I got to that through the commands down here. Right click and edit command settings is where we got to it. Plus, we also saw it when we went into the create points command itself by expanding the branch here. So there's the point number. All right, so it's in the create point command settings. So hopefully that'll keep it keep it set correctly. All right. Oh, I got one more question on topics we covered here. Final question for this portion. All right. We looked at our point styles. So to display a symbol on a Kogo point, like the fire hydrant that I had, what option do you need to do? Do we need to create a point style for each symbol, create a point style that links to a symbol library, or we do nothing and symbols are inserted separately? All right, so we'll let you guys vote on that one. Okay, and we'll revisit this a little bit more. So it's good for me to see how you guys are voting here. So a couple more people need to vote. Come on, folks. You guys are probably arguing for those of you sitting in a conference room here. All right, so there we got everybody voted. We'll close the poll and show the results. Again, the top vote getter is the correct answer. We had to create a point style for every symbol that we want to see in our drawing, and then that point style gets assigned the block. And that might be where a few of you who answered links to the symbol library got a little bit confused. I had to create a style for each symbol, so very good on your part here. All right, let me jump. We're going to jump over now. We're going to talk a little bit more now about description keys here. All right, for description keys in Civil 3D, a couple things we're going to see is, again, that FTO_I template drawing has all of the description keys that we need to use for the Nolte field code book, that little blue book that the surveyors use. All right, they are identical to what we had in Land Desktop. So I took our description key database file from Land Desktop and I've recreated it in Civil 3D. I created all the point styles for all of the symbols that we used in Land Desktop, and all of that again is in that FTO_I drawing. All right. So what do description keys do for us? For those of you who've never used these before, main thing we're going to use it is it's going to sort our points to layers, and that allows us to use layer manipulation to turn points on and off, which allows me to XREF this drawing and manipulate point display. All right, I can't change styles through an XREF, so the only thing I can do is manipulate layers. So we still need the layers in order to turn things on and off. So that's the main thing we're doing with this. The other thing we're going to see, or that we've seen, is that it does apply a symbol. Okay, again, in this case, in Civil 3D, unlike Land Desktop, we're applying a style which contains the symbols, but that's how we're controlling the appearance of the point object. And then we're also, you saw in the example I did before, I typed in SV, which is our field code for spot elevation, and it spelled out in English the full description of spot elevation. So we can see that in there. All right, so let's take a look at this in our Civil 3D now. I'm going to actually open up another drawing here. I missed. Let me try open. And I've got one already set up just to make sure it's clean. All right, this drawing I've already set up. It's got all of my styles and everything loaded. And let me change my scale to 20 just so it looks a little bit better. This was created from that FTO_I template. So I'm going to start on the settings tab, come into my points, and just point out a few things here. Again, here's all my point styles came in, and that's going to have all the symbols, everything I need. All right, so there's all of our point styles. We've got our label styles, and again, actually I didn't look at those too much here. We'll address those a little bit later on. And then we have our description key sets. And I've created a set. I've called it Nolte Default. Let me pick on that. As I click on it, they will show up down here at the bottom of the Prospector tab, but that's kind of hard to work with. So I'm going to actually right-click on them, and there's a command here to edit keys. And this will bring up a tabular editor in the panorama window, which lets me stretch it a little bit wider here so we can see a little bit more data, so let me make that a little bit bigger. All right. Very similar to the description key editor in Land Desktop. Couple things that are different is you'll see here for all of the description keys, say we're looking at the WT-FH here, see if I can find that one. Bear with me, there it is right there. So I'll highlight that field so we can kind of see what was going on. Here's where we tell it use the EXWT-FH style, which we saw also has the EXWT-FH block embedded. Okay, we are not assigning a point label style here, so you can see these all say default. So what we're going to see in a little bit, this refers back to the point group to control what label style is assigned to the point. All right, the format field, just like in Land Desktop, this is our full description, so anytime we get a point with WTFH, it's going to put the words fire hydrant on there. The $1 allows us to add in additional information to the point description, and it'll then add that to the full description. So I could do WTFH space, and then maybe the hydrant number, and then that would show up in the full description as well. All right, next field over, let me switch this down a little bit. There's the layer it's going to get inserted on, just like Land Desktop, and we're using all of our multi-standard layers. This will work well with Standards Manager with the layer state restore in terms of setting colors and line types. The parameters can be used to scale and rotate, and I'll make a symbol in just a little bit and show you how those work. We're going to default most of our point styles. We're going to use the drawing scale to control how big they are. There's a few exceptions, a few of the tree symbols here where we're doing like by drip line or radius, where we actually want to show the true physical dimension of that object. We've got use drawing scale toggled off, but then we're telling it to use the parameter. So use that radius value or use that drip line diameter or whatever, and it will apply that to scale the object or scale the symbol. And we're going to apply that to the XY. If you had three-dimensional blocks, we could then also apply the scale to the Z value. Right now, none of our symbols have a Z value. And then we also have parameters that we could use to rotate, and then you can specify what direction to rotate. You go clockwise or counterclockwise. All right, so let me make, well, let's bring in some points. So based on those, let me dismiss this. So I'm going to click the little green checkbox here, and I'm going to come up to my points. I'm going to use my create points toolbar here, and right there is my button. I'm going to import a point file. So I need to make sure I select the right format. And this is very similar to what we did in Land Desktop. So I do want PNEZD, delimited. I then need to go get my source file. So I'm going to come in, and I did this already this morning just to make sure I was in the right spot. So I've got a field data folder, and I've got my PNEZD file that we exported out of TGO. And this has all my point information, so we'll open that up. But I can actually go attach multiple files and import them all at once. So I don't have to go and do it one at a time. If I've got my data in 2 or 3 files, I can go grab them all and import it. All right, and just to kind of tease you a little bit, for 2010, they've actually improved this, and they have a data import wizard which works with point files, and it works also with fieldbook files and pretty much any other data format that you can import your point data. So pretty neat stuff coming in 2010 and future versions. We can add these points to a group. I'm not going to. And then also if we had coordinate projection, information or data, we could then do it elevation or coordinate transformation. But you have to use grid coordinates in your format, and then you can import those and convert them to drawing coordinates, so to speak, or change it to a different projection. I'm going to leave all those turned off, pick OK, and there they are. So it brought those in, so we can see we've got all of our different symbols here. We've got our trees for coniferous and deciduous. Most of my points, like spot elevations and top of curb, are using just the X marker. And then somewhere in here, I got, oh, there we go, I got a light pole using the light pole symbol. And if I select this, you'll see that they did sort it to the correct layer. So we can see the light pole's on the EXEC LP PT layer. If I pick my spot elevation, it's the EXTO SV PT layer, and if I pick my tree, it's on the LSTR PT layer. So it is signing all the layers correctly, which does allow me then to go into Standards Manager and use the reset color line type, and it will set the colors and line types based on the database. Plus it allows me to XREF this drawing, and I can manipulate point display by turning things on and off. All right, so that's the way description keys are going to work. Let me check my time. I'm doing all right. I'm going to actually make a key just to show you how that's done. Hopefully you don't have to make too many. Hopefully you can just kind of stick with the defaults here. What I'll do is actually I'll start up at the top here. Okay, based on where I'm selected, we do have our default one, and this is why all of our points will get assigned this point X style and the default label style. But I'm going to come in and right click and I'm going to select new key, or I could copy a key. So if a key is close to what you want, but you maybe need a different style or a different label style or a different scale factor, whatever, you can just copy one. I'm going to say make a new key, and unfortunately I put a right click to the top. It adds your new key to the bottom of the list, so we can see I scroll all the way down. There's my new description key, and I'm going to pick on the name fields twice to select it, and I'm going to do just FH. Let me try cap locks here. FH asterisk. Our standard description is WTFH to indicate that it's a water fire hydrant as opposed to an electrical fire hydrant or whatever. I'm going to do just a shorthand version of WTFH. All right, so now I can go through and tell it. All right, so I pick that. I'm going to select my default, so I'm going to toggle that on. I can now pick in this field, and I can come in here and I can tell it which symbol I want. So I'm going to come down and grab the WTFH symbol. Pick OK, so that'll apply that symbol. I can apply a point label style here. I'm going to clear that one. I'm going to leave that on default. Here's the format for my description, so I'm just going to type in fire hydrant, nothing else. I can specify the layer, and I'll pick in that field. I get my layer select dialog, and that's going to take forever to type it, so let me just come down to WTFHPT, got that guy. And if I want, I can scale it. So I'm going to say, sure, let's show you how to scale it. So I'm going to turn scale parameter 1 on, plus I'm also going to use the drawing scale, so I can affect that. And I'm going to apply it to the X and Y, and we'll go ahead and apply it to the Z. And while I'm at it, let's go ahead and throw in a rotation parameter, which will be the second parameter. If you want to swap those, you can pick on these parameters list, and you'll see you can have up to 9 parameters on a point descriptor, and those are space delimited parameters as we type in our data either in the data collector or on the keyboard. All right, so my first parameter is going to be scale. My second parameter will be rotate. So let's test this guy out. So I'm going to come in over here. I'm going to use just the create point miscellaneous. I'll pick a point, and then a description, make sure cap lock's on, is going to be FH. And elevation, whatever. All right, so there's my first one. Comes in using the default style. Everything looks just like my other ones. So let me add in another point here. We'll go right there. And this time I'll do FH, and I'm going to put in a 2 for the scale factor. And I'm not going to worry about the elevation. And this one you'll see now this symbol is twice as big. So this is how we're doing our tree symbols, in that the surveyors in the field are coding in what type of tree, space, and then what the trunk diameter is, and it's using that to scale the symbols. I can also do it with the rotation that I applied here. So I can do FH space 2 space, and then I want a rotation. I'll say go 90 degrees and enter, and we'll see that one comes in with it rotated 90 degrees. All right. If you don't want your labels to rotate, let me go edit my label style real quickly here. So that's using the PZD style here. I'm going to right-click and edit that. And I did not get it. Let me try it again. Edit that. There we go. So I must have missed the command there. On the general tab for label styles, and this is pretty much all label styles, here's where we tell it how to rotate it. And you can see our default for our point label styles here. I've set them all to by object, but I can also do it to view or world coordinate system. So if I just go to view here, and then it'll update my drawing. And did it not update? Oh, I'm a liar. Okay, let me see if world does that. Okay, so I guess it is going to rotate. I rotate my point, it is going to rotate my symbol here. So I apologize for that. I'm a liar. So let me go back to object. Because there's nothing else I can do here. I can't rotate. I can put in another rotate angle to rotate it back, but that's going to affect all of them, so I don't want that to happen. So it looks like they are rotating with the object. So you know, if I want it to be orthogonal, I guess I could always pick it and grab it and pull it out that way and leave it that way. So hopefully you're kind of seeing how the description keys work. I've got a few minutes left here. I've got about 5 minutes according to my timer here. So last thing I want to look at is the point groups. All right, nope, I lied. One thing I want to look at here in terms of symbols and styles. I want to change this symbol so it's bigger, but I have no idea which style it's using because, again, we saw over here in our point styles there's a bunch of styles here. I have no idea which one this is. There is a little program I wrote in the Nolte Lisp library that I want to show it. I'm going to type in NL to bring up our Lisp library dialog, and then in the Civil 3D category I've got a command here to do point style scale. So let me load that one, and it's going to ask me to select the symbol, so I'm going to pick on that one and then hit return, and I get just a little dialog, and what it does is actually goes finds which style it's using, what block it's using, so I can just see that, and then I can actually adjust my overall size here. So if I say, you know, these trees look too small at this scale, I can say, well, go to 0.4, and then I'll say update the style, and all of the objects in my drawing using that style will resize. And then same thing, I go pick another point and say, well, I'm going to take those hydrants there, and so I can see I got the EXWTFH, and say those are too big, so we can make those a little bit smaller, update it, and those will be a little bit smaller. Or I can set it back, update, and resize. And it's just a nice little utility instead of having to hunt through and figure out what these all are. I'm going to get that changed back to 2, update, and close. But that way we're not having to hunt through all 30, 100,000 of these to figure that out. All right. So that's a little bit more on that. I got another question here just to see who's been paying attention. So we're going to ask you now, based on the points raw description keys will do which of the following. So I want you to select all of those that apply. Okay, so pick what description keys will do to our points as we add them to our drawing file. All right, this is a multiple. You can pick more than one on this one. The other ones were singles, so you can pick multiple here. All right, so we'll let you guys vote a little bit. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it. Looks like you guys, for the most part, are getting it here. I interrupted you, but you see everybody's picking everything, and really that want to highlight that is everything that description keys will do for us. We assign the style as one of the main things we do so we can get the trees and the fire hydrants. We assign the label style, which we saw in the Nolte description keys was set to default, so we're actually not really using that. We're using it to spell out full descriptions, so we can see in our drawing that we had spot elevations and hydrant and so on. And then we also saw I could use it to scale and rotate. And then the last one then is the assigning the layers. So let's go ahead and hide that. And we're going to switch back to PowerPoint mode here. And my final PowerPoint slide. And we're going to talk about now is description keys. Or I did description keys. Let me try that again. We're going to talk about point groups now. And to get on the right slide. So point groups. What a point group is, no more, it is a named list of point numbers. And I'll show you a couple different methods for defining a point group. We use those to manage points. All right, it allows me to keep track of points I imported in a certain field book or points by different descriptors. I want to grab all my tree points. I want to grab all my edge of pavement points and so on. So we can use it to manage points. We use it to apply default styles, and what we're going to see is that all of our label styles, the default, are applied through the group, and we saw our description keys, those were all set to default. And we'll also use our groups to control the display of our objects. All right, so we can, based on what group a point is assigned to, we can control whether or not you see the marker, what the marker looks like, or whether or not you see the label. And then the final thing I'm not going to show you today, but point groups are a real nice way to define the selection set of points that you're using to build a surface model. All right, so finishing up here, let's jump back over to Civil 3D, and we're going to look at our groups here. In the point groups, there's one that you're always going to have called all. All right, this is the default setting. So why are my points being labeled with the point number, elevation, in description? Well, if I go into the properties for this point group, we will see that its default is a standard point style, which probably doesn't make sense. I probably should set that to our point X, but we're not using it anyways because we saw our description keys were assigning point styles. And then the point label style, if I say I just want to see point number real quickly, I change that to P, pick OK, and then you'll see all of my points now will default to that label style unless I've assigned a style explicitly in a point group, or in a description key, excuse me. All right, so I want to change that back. I'm going to properties, and I'm going to say I'd like my defaults to be PZD. Pick OK, so I've got my point number elevation description as my default. Say I want to do just my spot elevation points with elevation only. I'm going to actually come in, I'm going to make a new group here. So I'm going to right click on point groups, pick new, and here's the default name, but I'm just going to say spot elevation. And I can say for spot elevations what marker or what style do I want to use, and then here's where I'm going to say, well, for anything in this group, use not the point number, I want the Z value, the elevation, and then I tell it how I want to define my group. And this is very similar to what you did in Land Desktop. I can either pick another group or multiple groups. I can do it based on raw description, which is going to be the quickest. So I'm going to come down to my S's and scroll down until I find the SV one. I will toggle that on, and then I come down and look at my point list. So there's all the points it found. All right, in this point list, I can actually edit items in this. Oh, not, I guess not. They changed it. My bad. So I can't change anything here. This is just a list. If we look at the Include tab, we'll see that by picking the raw description, it actually added that into Match Raw Description. We also see there is a Query Builder tab where I can actually build compound queries, where I can do and or logical operations to build fairly complex group definitions. I usually just come in here, pick point groups, and toggle. So, but you can do a much more complex setting here. Overrides allow you to force points to use different descriptions, different elevations, and we also force points to use different styles. And I'll show you this in a little bit. Default our points, the way we've got it set up, we're going to use the description key style, but I can use this to override that. So let me pick OK to that. And what we'll see now is that our points, that our spot elevation points will now show up with just the elevation value. And this is controlled based on the order that they appear over here in our point group list. So spot elevations appears before all points. So we see that's why my spot elevation points are showing up this way. If I right-click on point groups and go into properties, I get a dialog with a listing, and I can actually change the order that they appear in the list. So if I move spot elevations down below here and pick OK and tell it to refresh that, and I have to, looks like I have to regen here. Okay. When I update my drawing now, because all points is above spot elevations, all the points are going to use the label style defined in all points. Okay, let me make a couple more groups and kind of play with this a little bit. So I'll make another group. We'll do one called tree. And I'm going to use raw description. And I'm going to just say include raw, and I'm just going to do tr asterisk. And maybe for this one, I just want to see the full description. Okay. So that one comes in the top, and you'll see now that my tree descriptors, it's only showing the 6-inch tree, 6-inch tree, or whatever. Same thing here, it's 3-inch tree. I don't have tree types in these. So it's showing that because the trees occur in the list before the all points. One that I've seen in some of the discussion groups is kind of neat is actually I'm going to make a new group, and I'm going to call it all points off. And what I'll do is I'm going to select none for my styles, pick OK, and then regen. Oops, what did I do? I did this practicing the other day too. I didn't tell it what my groups were. I just set the styles. I have to tell it what points are in the group. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say include, and if I want all points, I can quickly just select here include all points, pick OK, and then Regen. Okay, so it's turning everything off with the exception of the symbols because those are applied by the description keys. So the last piece I need to do in here is in my properties I need to go over the override, and I need to tell it to override whatever I've assigned through description keys, use what the group is, pick OK, and now all my points are off. Then what I can do is using that display order, if I want just my tree points, I will move trees above, all points off, and now I have just my tree points. And it doesn't matter what layer they're on, I don't have to manipulate layers. I can do it all by group. So I go back into properties, I can bring my spot elevations up above, my all points off, pick OK. So now I have trees and spot elevations. And then if I want to see everything again, I can go to my properties here, and I can just say, we'll take all points off, move it to the bottom of the pile, and there they all come. Okay, a couple other ways to make groups, just to show you some of the options here. I'm going to say slope area, and we'll go ahead and leave those defaults here, but I'm going to say let's define include with numbers matching and actually do a selection set in the drawing, and I'll do like a window polygon, and I can come through here and I have all of these points. And that's a slope area that we added in. So we'll select all those. So I can have those points, pick OK, and then again, now if I go into my properties, I can take that slope area, move it down below the off, and did I not get that? All right, what did I... always mess up on one of these. So we've got include. I got my point numbers. Oh, I'm being dumb. I apologize. It's doing exactly these points. What group are they in? They're going to match the all points as well. So I need to move that one down below. So they're still displaying because they're in the all points. So now if I do this, they all turn on. Now if I want to see the slope area, I can come into my properties here and move it above, and then they'll come on and off. So again, you kind of have to watch, and it gets even confusing for me. I've been playing this with this for a while. Where is it either above or below in this list order? All right, so hopefully you saw that, or got a feel of how this behaves. I have a few questions, but I see I'm a couple minutes over. I apologize for that. There's a few questions. See if I can address these real quickly here. Why does the arrow not point to the node of the point? That's a good question. Anybody else notice that? So if I come in here and grip edit this, it points off the centroid, and what it's doing, it's a function of the label style. So let me come over here. So I need to find quickly my label style. So that's the Z. Let me edit this, and I'm going to come over. I think I got the right tab here. And I think I did that backwards. It's going to be, like I said, it's either there or here. Let me edit. I can never remember. Okay, it's in the, I just didn't find it. It is in the label style. I apologize for flopping around here. There it is. Kind of had this because I knew somebody was going to ask me this, and I can never. I'll get back. I don't want to waste. It's in there. It's buried in there. There is a setting. Okay. Something move label. I'm not sure what they're asking. You created a style for each point. I'm not planning to. I don't blame you either. Again, if you use that FTO_I drawing, that has the style set up for our field book files. That's good. Okay. Locked points. That's a good question. How do you lock points? I can't. Can I go into here? Yes, I can. So in the editors, so either through Prospector or through the point editor, I can select, right-click, and I can lock them, and it shows that they cannot be edited. So now if I zoom into one of those points here, and of course I need to go into my settings here. Let me move all points to the top here. Okay, so here's the ones. So I've locked these. So now if I try to grip at it, you'll see there is no longer a grip displayed. If I try to move and pick it, it won't move. Okay, so that's how you lock them. It's not a fail-safe. Anybody can come in and unlock them. Okay. Isn't the label offset? No, that arrow leader is not the label offset. There is a setting that says whether to point to the extents of the symbol or point to the centroid of the symbol when I do a leader. And I for life of me, can't remember whether it's in the point style or the label style. And I'll get that back. I'll email that out to everybody. So, all right, well, hopefully you guys got a lot from this. I do want to remind you that in a couple weeks is a companion session to this where I'll look at actually importing a fieldbook file through the Trimble link tools, and we'll introduce you to the survey tab here in Civil 3D, talk about survey databases, talking about survey commands, managing all of our observation data a little bit, and kind of how that aspect works. That's kind of critical for the surveyors because my intent is at the end of the month to disable 2007, meaning that this is going to be the only place you'll be able to find Trimble link to download a data collector and create a fieldbook file. Once you've done that, you are more than welcome to go back to your LDT 2009 and go to the survey menu there and import your fieldbook file and work in Land Desktop. But I thought it'd be nice to at least have an understanding of points, description keys, that if you did import directly into Civil 3D, you'd at least be able to manipulate and work with your data. So thank you all for your time today. Hopefully it was worth it for you, and I look forward to seeing you guys in a couple weeks. Thanks.